Association of University Professors and its newly formed local chapter, the NCC AAUP Advocacy Chapter. My name is Kimberley Reiser, and I am the interim president of our new chapter, the NAAC. You should have received a folder at the registration table. Included in the folder are the NAAC's mission and goals and the Centennial Declaration of the AAUP, which in effect is the charter of values for this organization. As many of you know, the AAUP has two types of chapters: collective bargaining chapters and advocacy chapters. Our chapter is an advocacy-only chapter and is not involved with collective bargaining. On our campus, the NAAC works to support our governance body, the Academic Senate, and our faculty unions, the NCCFT and the AFA. Today I'm going to give brief introductory remarks, and then Dr. Julie Schmid, Executive Director of AAUP, will address us. After Dr. Schmid's presentation, there will be ample time for questions. On behalf of the Interim Executive Committee, I would like to welcome you to our kickoff meeting for the NAAC. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join with us and begin the conversation as to how we, as a faculty, can reclaim the dialogue and increase faculty influence, which appears to be slipping through our fingertips on a daily basis. Our chapter was established on August 26th, at which time bylaws were adopted, interim officers were elected, and our mission and goals were established. In brief, the NAAC is focused on the policies and standards that promote the integrity of the professoriate. Our chapter will work to advance shared governance, academic freedom, educational equality, and the hiring of a diverse faculty. The interim officers elected in August are Vice President Darren Siminoff, History, Political Science, and Geography, Secretary Nina Romano, Art, Treasurer Florence D. Budakian, English, Media Director Jason Horn, Art, Membership Director Valerie Lagakis, Reading and Basic Education, and President Kimberley Reiser, Biology. We will be having an election in December for the permanent officers and members at large. We encourage you to consider running for these important positions and to get involved. Once the elections occur, committees will be established to address our goals. Remember, officer positions are open to all AAUP members. We urge you to get involved and to join the AAUP. If you want to learn more, check out our website, aaupncc.org, which has a wealth of information about our chapter and AAUP, thanks to our Media Director, Professor Foreman. Our kickoff meeting today comes at an important juncture in the organization's history, as AAUP is celebrating its centennial year. The American Association of University Professors, founded in 1915, developed many of the landmark policies and standards that have shaped our profession and secured the type of academic freedom and integrity that allow us to provide a high-quality education to the students we work with and to the communities we serve. For a century, the AAUP has diligently fought to protect academic freedom and shared governance and continues to do so. Furthermore, the AAUP has a prominent and recognized voice in Washington, and by forming an AAUP chapter, we are now part of that national conversation. Each day, it seems that we're facing new threats as a profession. We need to only open a newspaper, read a higher education blog or journal to see what the latest challenge is. The NAAC believes that one of our functions is to provide information to you, the faculty. With that goal in mind, we developed the weekly read. Each Monday morning, we send out an article with commentary on a timely topic in higher education and on our campus. You can find our weekly reads through the website. There is an area for comments and also for suggested topics. We would love to hear from you. What we have been facing at our college this semester locally with our Board of Trustees and interim president and statewide with the SUNY Board of Trustees is unfortunately not unusual. The erosion of shared governance and the loss of faculty influence is unfortunately becoming the new normal, the new national normal. So what is a faculty to do? We believe the answer is simple. Work together as a united faculty, full-time, part-time, instructional, and professional, and advocate as hard as we can for what we believe in. Of utmost importance is the preservation of high-quality, affordable higher education for our students. At Nassau Community College, we have always prided ourselves on delivering that promise. We educate all who walk through our doors looking for those opportunities that a genuine, broad-based education will secure for them now and throughout their lives as citizens, breadwinners, and most importantly, as human beings who deserve meaningful lives. The NAAC's goal is to hold fast to this mission. Increasingly, our students are first-generation college students, the children of immigrants, and from under-resourced communities who count us being here as a full opportunity college that offers them not an extended high school education or simply workforce development, but the chance to aspire and reach for their dreams. And yes, here at Nassau, that often requires that we provide our students with developmental and remedial courses so that they may reach their goals. We cannot abandon our calling. We believe that we work most effectively when we work together. Erin Borlow said it best in the most recent issue of Advocacy. I quote, "A reinvigorated faculty, tenure track and contingent, full-time and part-time, working together, recognizing we are all colleagues with responsibilities to each other, to our institutions, to our profession, and to our society, is one of the most effective antidotes to the decline of faculty influence. This is our responsibility. We must seize it." End of quote. Before I introduce Dr. Schmid, let me thank the members of our interim executive committee. It has been a formidable task starting an organization from the grassroots on our campus. The interim officers put forth a Herculean effort in developing our chapter and working incredibly hard on today's event. Lastly, I'd like to thank Matt and Tom for all he did to make this event possible. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Schmid, our keynote speaker. A little over a year ago, in October 2013, Dr. Schmid assumed the position of Executive Director of the AAUP, in which she is responsible for overseeing AAUP's national office in Washington. She received her PhD in English from the University of Iowa in 2000. Even as a graduate student, Julie Schmid was passionate about academic worker rights. She became well known nationally as a graduate student fighting for her fellow graduate students. After she received her doctorate, Dr. Schmid taught at Portland Community College and Portland State University, where she was coordinator for its AAUP chapter. In addition to her work with AAUP, Dr. Schmid also served as Chief of Staff for AFC Wisconsin in 2011. We all remember 2011 in Wisconsin, when public higher education was under attack by the legislature. We are incredibly fortunate that Dr. Schmid has taken time away from her multitude of responsibilities in Washington, D.C. to carry her message to us in person. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Julie Schmid, Executive Director. Thank you, Kimberly. That was a wonderful discussion, introduction to AAUP, and really very kind words about me as well. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for inviting me here. This is quite a crowd. I was telling a few of you before this started. I've been Executive Director now for a little over a year, and this is the first standing room only crowd I've gotten to speak to. So this is very exciting. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I thought Kimberly did a good job of summing up a little bit of AAUP's history and sort of our fundamental values. One of the things I've really been focusing on over the past few months is talking to faculty and other academic workers around the country about the next 100 years. AAUP is really, we're this interesting, it's our centennial year, and part of what we're doing is looking back at our history, but the other piece of it, I think, is where is the profession going? What are we going to be over the next 100 years? It's pretty obvious there's some major transformations happening in the higher education sector, whether you're a community college, a four-year comprehensive, a private liberal arts college, a flagship university. There's just incredible political and sociological and market forces right now, I think, coming to bear on higher ed. We have been for a while, and we're still kind of trying to figure out what that means, I think. So, good. Oh, that's the one. There we go. So, like I said, I think we want to look back a little bit. Over the past 30 years, the profession has undergone restructuring and deprofessionalization. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. You're probably living that experience on a day-to-day basis. The unbundling of the profession, the growth of the use of contingent faculty, just big changes. I think now we're seeing some of this with MOOCs and a move to put a lot of education online. This has been concurrent with the radical defunding of public higher education by state legislatures. I know this is old news by now, but one of the things that we're really looking at a lot at the national level is what is happening at the state level with funding to higher education. And it's just been a precipitous drop since about the mid-70s in funding for higher education. And really, that in some ways what that means is there's a social contract in this country that's been broken. There was an understanding of higher education as a public good, right? And I think all of us who came up through the system have that understanding of it. Those of us who are engaged in educating students see it as a public good. The role of an education is to, the role of higher education is to provide an educated citizenry. It's pretty essential to democracy that people are educated and able to think critically. What happens when access to public higher education starts to dwindle because of funding? These are serious concerns. Part of what it means for our profession, like I said, is we've seen this restructuring of the staffing model in higher education too. There's a nationwide trend. 70% of all faculty appointments allow what we would call contingent appointments. This number includes full-time, non-tenure track faculty. It includes part-time adjuncts, sort of the traditional adjunct model. When you look at the national data, the number jumps to 77% if we include graduate employees. So that's a pretty fundamental shift in higher education. I worked at AAUP between teaching and working in Portland, Oregon, and then going to Wisconsin. I worked for 5.5 or 6 years in AAUP's Department of Organizing and Services as an organizer. It was my first tour of duty. And one of the things I found really interesting going back and looking over this data was at that time the profession was a little over 40% contingent. And I remember everybody was throwing up their hands. Oh my God, we're almost the profession is really changing. There's this growth in contingent faculty. What's going to happen when we reach the threshold of 50%? 50% of the faculty are in contingent positions and 50% have access to tenure. Well, we've blown that number out of the water in 12 years. And one of the real concerns, I think, is that it leads to a lack of economic security, right? If you're teaching in one of these kinds of positions, oftentimes, you're lucky if you have a year-to-year contract. Oftentimes people are teaching in semester appointments, cobbling positions together all over. I mean, this is all stuff you guys know. But, one of the concerns becomes if you're struggling to make a living, what happens to academic freedom? When you can be non-renewed at the drop of a hat, if you grade too hard or you teach something that the board, member of the board doesn't like, what happens to the fundamental principle of freedom in that environment? Here's a nice little graph. If any of you have liked AAUP on Facebook or follow us on Twitter, this was circulating last year around, I think it was Cotown maybe, but this shows the trend I was talking about. You can see what's really happened in the profession and this visual representation of that. So, another thing that we really need to be talking about is what's happening to governance in this environment. Governance is at risk. Fewer faculty are in governance-eligible positions. There's an increasing tendency to dump governance work on junior colleagues, to encourage them to take on governance as a service as they're working up to promotion. And that can cause, again, some concerns just about how well governance is functioning. Not because junior colleagues aren't good, engaged academics, but because, again, there's sort of this culture of fear up there sometimes when people don't have the job security. The other thing we're seeing, and I'm sure every time I talk about this, people nod, is administrative overreach into governance. Topics, I see somebody nodding. Topics that used to be really the purview of faculty, right? The curriculum, for instance, decisions on hiring, we have decisions about promoting colleagues in the field. We're finding that there's a lot more administrative overreach. There are little examples everywhere. It's death by 1,000 cuts, I think, in some ways. One big example at the national level right now, and depending on what you think of this individual, but it's pretty clear there was administrative overreach into governance, was the decision to dismiss Stephen Salida at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. That was clearly a decision where his peers had hired him, and the board stepped in and reversed the decision. And I think there's a lot of debate to be had about his shall we say, extramural utterances on Twitter and all that, but it was fundamentally the overturning of the faculty decision. So it's part of what we're seeing as a result of this, and Kimberley talked about this a little bit in her comments. It's really a breakdown of academic citizenship. There's an increased disciplinarity. People really focus on their field, on their topic. There appears to be, because of overwork, because of the administrative overreach, really a breakdown of sort of that sense of the academic community. As all of us, the quote that you read from Aaron Barlow, I think sums it up perfectly. The responsibility that we have to our students and to one another, and really to the public as well. I think it's really going to break down to that. And really, I mean, it's what those of us who've worked in the labor movement will call divide and conquer. I mean, the administration and other corporate forces have done a very good job of dividing and conquering within the focus area. So one of the ways we see the administrative overreach playing out is the administration's tendency to go around recognize shared governance bodies and consult hand-picked groups of faculty. I really feel like I want to do a presentation sometime where I say, you have problems with governance when? Because every time, almost every campus I've been on, and again, across across higher education, you find, there's some big issue that's of importance on the campus, and the way the administration decides to address it is not to go through the elected governance body or the union or whatever sort of institutional body exists, but there'll be like some hand-picked group of faculty that they consult with, the committee, and they say, well, we consulted the faculty. We checked that box off. Another thing we're seeing nationally, there's a big trend in this, and that's pseudo-exigency as a way to cut instructional positions outside of shared governance. We're seeing a lot of this all over the country actually right now. If I ever needed proof that administrators all go to the same conferences and learn the same tricks, this is one of the places where I've seen it. At universities and colleges all over the country, we're seeing cases where the administration really wants to reshape the curriculum, or reshape departments, or sort of reshape fundamentally the academic program. And instead of taking that question on, full on or head on and dealing with it through the appropriate governance channels, they declare financial crisis. They don't declare exigency, because usually if you declare exigency, either under, campus guidelines of governance guidelines, or under your collective bargaining agreement, or under state law, there's a process you have to go through when you declare exigency, right? So they'll declare financial crisis as a way to sort of do an end run around that process. And again, an end run around really consulting the faculty, because when you declare exigency, there's a whole process you go through that involves some faculty. Another place we're seeing a lot of this sort of undermining of the faculty's role in, what I would call sort of the primary governance role in the curriculum is the growth of MOOCs, especially for credit, and a move towards competencies and kind of grades. I think there's a lot of debate to be had about distance education or hybridized distance ed and in-person ed, especially when you're talking about trying to provide education to a very diverse group of students. One of the things we're seeing, though, is that I think that can be done, and the faculty need to really be central to the development of the program. Part of what we're seeing, unfortunately, at a lot of institutions is that when they decide to go this route, the faculty are not really involved in that process. It's a process that's imposed on the faculty. A lot of the recent data, especially out of like the California State University system, is showing that if you don't have the faculty directly involved in this process, it doesn't work out so well for the students, unfortunately. So part of what we're trying to do over this centennial year for AAUP is really think about how do we take back higher education. There's been sort of talked about all the bad stuff that's been going on over the past few years. How do we take back higher education and really reestablish what higher education is in this country? And part of it, we think, is that we need to reclaim the big ideas, including the importance of liberal arts education in the formation of educated and engaged citizenry. And that's just really important. We need to start talking about higher education and the role it plays in the formation of citizenry in a democratic country. I think we have really shied away from talking about. I think we've bought the argument that has been made over the past 30 or 40 years, this austerity argument, and sort of this hyper austerity argument. It is just absolutely the case. And my degree's in English, as Kimberley said, but people who do social science have, I asked them, they confirmed this for me. U.S. social mobility post-World War II is linked to affordable, accessible higher education. The great shift in this country, the great growth of the middle class, was tied to a lot of social programs post-Depression and post-World War II. One of the very important ones was the GI Bill, right? And sort of the opening up of public higher education to a whole sector of people who hadn't had access to it before. I think one of the things we shy away from talking about, and we probably need to take on a little bit more strongly, is the fact that the future of the professoriate is fundamental to the future of higher education. I think our colleagues who are active in the contingent academic labor movement have done a really good job of articulating this. They talk about teaching conditions, working conditions being, students' learning conditions, right? I think we have to, faculty deserve to be paid for the work they do. They deserve to be paid more than minimum wage for the work they do. And, I think we have to talk about economic security when we talk about what faculty do. You can't have higher education in this country without academic freedom, and you can't have academic freedom without economic security. You can have it as a principle without economic security. It's very hard to exercise it without economic security. We know that tenure is a really good means for ensuring economic security and academic freedom. We also know that, when we go back and look at that chart that I had up earlier, it's hard to argue that tenure is this ideal that everybody in the profession is going to have access to. That's just, I think, the demographics are such that that's going to be really, really tough. But what we do know is that where we can't achieve tenure, we need real job security for our colleagues who are in positions of tenure track. And there's some really good work being done in this area. There are two examples I can think of right off the top of my head. One is Wright State University in Ohio has done a great job with extending job security to their full-time, non-tenure track faculty. After 6 years, you cannot be non-renewed without just cause. You have a continuing term appointment after, sort of the traditional 6 years, unless they can prove cause, which is the same thing with tenured faculty. A place where we've seen really good work on this with part-time faculty has been the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon, where we have a joint AAUP, ASC local. They are a unionized campus, and they're represented by both AAUP and the American Federation of Teachers. They negotiated into their contract language that not only moves full-time non-tenure track faculty to the tenure track, but moves part-time faculty to full-time appointments. So they have a system where every year they go, management and labor, the administration and the faculty union sit down and kind of go over a list, it's based on seat time, it's based on how long somebody's been there, so it's a really good system. AAUP's this past year, November 2013, we approved the new mission statement, and it really tries to get at both this economic security question and sort of opening up who AAUP speaks to. One of the problems I think AAUP has had historically is people think of it as the organization for faculty at very prestigious institutions with tweed coats and rather elbow patches, and that in fact is not who we represent. We do represent some of those people, but most of our members are at smaller institutions. They're at the four-year comprehensive, they're at community colleges. We represent academic professionals or non-teaching faculty. We represent graduate employees, postdoctoral fellows, and really anybody who's engaged in the work that, teaching and research work in higher education. So we really want to focus on that going forward. We've also made organizing central to our mission to help the higher education community organize to make our goals a reality. And that really comes out of this idea of the national office can promulgate policies, positions, standards, but they're really not, it requires faculty being organized and engaging in collective action on their campuses to make those policies and standards lived realities. They're not lived realities, they just exist in the red book or on the website somewhere. They're lived realities by you all doing the work you do on your campuses. So faculty are, really what I'm talking about here is how faculty as stewards of the institution, right? And we need to reassert this role. We think this is completely consistent with our we think it's completely consistent with our statements on governance, and we also think all those engaged in this work should have a role in governance, and that includes contingent faculty members. I know you guys the chapter has done a lot of work with our statement on government of colleges and universities, so I won't get into that here. I know you guys have recently had an issue come up around this. We need to engage other organizations and community members who share our goals. AAUP recently disseminated our Centennial Declaration. I know you guys have circulated it on campus as well. We really see that as a way to reach out to parents, students, and alumni. One of the things we've learned is that the research shows that the public really supports public higher education. They also support faculty. What they don't support is the key word. They don't like the word tenure. When you poll the average citizen, that word gives them some trouble. When you describe what tenure is, if you go to them and you say, we'd like to talk to you about job security for the people who are, who teach, to teach what they think is important, they're pretty supportive of that. We also need to engage our colleagues off the tenure track. That's extremely important at this point. So we need to acknowledge that there's no adjunct crisis, but rather a system-wide crisis. There's this breakdown in higher education. There's been a lot of good work on that. Recently, Aaron Barlow had a great academic blog entry on that in January. Mark Bousquet has been writing on this for about a decade, if you're interested in reading his work. I think we need to focus on, we need to understand this as a shared struggle. We need to focus on what unites us, not what divides us. And that's when you're talking to groups on campus, across faculty groups, talking to students, talking to parents, talking to alumni. And this is what, I got to spend some time in Wisconsin over the past 5 years, and this is really what the labor union world would call solidarity. It's building those relationships and focusing on what unites us. We have a new nationwide campaign that we hope all of our faculty on all campuses will get involved in. We're calling it the One Faculty Campaign, and it is really focused on this question of job security for faculty and contingent appointments, either through collective bargaining or handbooks as a way to really take away the incentive for contingency. Because one of the things we're finding at places like the University of Oregon, where, like I said, they negotiated this really great contract language, is that it really takes away the incentive to exploit part-time faculty if you create a path to job security and economic security for them. At the state and campus level, we need to identify issues of shared concern and organize and mobilize around them. We need to identify, again, this is what unites us all, and especially I think with our students. We need to be strategic in identifying these issues. We could sit here and brainstorm for the next 5 hours, but we need to really identify the strategic issues, the ones that are most important and unite us all. And then I think we really need to recognize that our strength is in collective action. AAUP is putting more resources into that. We have a whole new department. This is the Department of Chapter and Conference Services. It's here to provide webinars, on-campus trainings, to come and help and work with chapters. We have an organizing department that comes and helps with internal organizing and building the chapter. And really that's what we want to focus on, is helping you all build your chapter on campus. So I can stop there and take questions.
Where you wanted to be?
Yeah, I think that's fun.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. So now we'll open the floor up to. Questions either for Dr. Schmid or the executive committee. We have there.
Dr. Schmid, I really appreciated your peroration just before it, in which you were talking about focusing on what unites us rather than divides us. Especially thinking about things like Wisconsin, where my brother-in-law tried to do just that, going across the labor and potential divide in policy matters. But one of the things I have to admit that drew me to AAUP again after many years was the position on the Salida case. And knowing how I feel here, and the reaction of people here to those of us who favor a democratic state in Palestine, I have to wonder whether similar cases, regardless of what the political pressure is, regardless of what the positions are that are involved, are going to be a focus of AAUP's national office, or whether it's a one-time thing.
Well, the way a case comes to the national office, right, usually the cases we take on for investigation and potential censure are ones that really rise to a level of national significance. Like I said, I think the real issue from AAUP's point of view when it comes to the Stephen Salida case is not the political issue so much. We've been pretty consistent, I think, on our position on boycotts and some other issues related to Israel and Palestine. For us, the real issue was he was an individual who was hired with tenure, right? He was hired with tenure by his institution. He went through the appropriate hiring process in his department, the appropriate review process, up through the chain. He was literally, and I know this because I spoke with him, he was literally in his car. He and his wife had both, quit their jobs, they sold their house. They were in their car moving to Champaign when he got the call from the president or chancellor of the institution, basically, quote unquote, withdrawing the appointment. For us, the concern really was he was hired for tenure. So once you have tenure, there's a due process that the institution has to go through. That was not gone through. I think the other real concern with the Salida case is, and this has been all over the newspapers, right, and all over, Chronicle of Higher Ed, Inside Higher Ed. It's very clear that there was political influence brought to bear. Chris Kennedy, who was president of the Board of Trustees in Illinois, has been very open in the press about the fact that there was pressure placed on him by donors, and that was why they did this. So that for us is a real concern, is that sort of political intrusion into a process that, we believe really is a process that we believe that the faculty in the Department of Native American Studies are the ones to make the call about who to hire. And if there's some real concern about his fitness to teach, there's a due process for addressing that. But, one of the interesting things with the Salida case is that there was an earlier case on the same campus involving a contingent faculty member named James Kilgore, who taught in African Studies, and he was, it didn't get the press because it wasn't as sexy, it wasn't this tenured professor, but he was non-renewed at the end of the academic year because, again, that same Board of Trustees president, Chris Kennedy, somehow realized this guy had been involved in the SLA back in the day and served prison time. He's completely, he's a model citizen. And, again, there was sort of this political intrusion, this threat from the legislature and from donors that, we don't want him teaching there anymore. So for us, that issue of political intrusion is pretty significant. And I think especially as we see more and more corporate intrusion into higher education and into our legislative process, that's a big concern. And frankly, that's what AAUP was founded on, right? And that's why John Reed and Arthur Lovejoy founded AAUP, is because of political intrusion into higher education during the building days. Yeah, it's sort of, for a lot of reasons, we seem to have headed back into a gilded age, and the same problems seem to be arising.
I thought that your presentation was really fine when it came to delineating what the situation was and is. Mm-hmm. What I felt was missing was the very basic human question, why? And it seems to me that when you ask that question, for example, about changes in funding and changes in the ratio between full-time and part-time faculty, then you're led off campus to the general society. And I think that those issues really need to be discussed and addressed. Otherwise, we're going to be confined in the same way that they're talking about departmental localization. The campus is localized unless it's connected with the broader society, and I missed that in what you were saying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. I mean, I would encourage you to look at our Centennial Declaration. That really does take on that issue, but I appreciate the feedback.
I have a structural question. In campuses where there's both an advocacy chapter and collective bargaining is handled by other people, I want to go back and forward. Historically, how have they kept from essentially competing with one another, perhaps pulling in slightly different directions, when I think we can all agree that the goals make, I think for most of us, incredibly good sense. And how do you foresee that happening here? And I guess that's more of a local than a national kind of issue. The second part, anyway.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Kimberly and I were talking about this a little bit on the ride over here, and I was thinking about it last night, too. We have campuses where there are AAUP advocacy chapters and the faculty are represented for collective bargaining by another organization, you know, whether it be AFP or NEA or United Auto Workers or SCIU, members of the player in higher education, as we know. Really, I think a lot of it is, to me, and how this plays out at the local level, I'm not sure I can answer that question about spending more time on your campus, but I really think part of it is looking for what the shared issues are and how both organizations can support each other with furthering that goal. I mean, I think one thing that it's a delicate. I come out of a collective bargaining background, right? I helped organize a union at the University of Iowa when I was a graduate employee. I've organized unions when I was at AAUP before. I organized 9 higher ed unions for AFP in Wisconsin prior to Scott Walker's ascendancy. So I'm very committed. To collective bargaining. And I think I also, I want to make sure I go on the record and say at the national level, AFP is a really strong partner with AAUP, and we really value both organizations. The interesting thing is I know from both sides that that's a valuable partnership. I think, it's figuring out where you can work together and avoid stepping on each other's toes, right? It seems to me the obvious place is probably around governance issues, since that's AAUP's stock and trade in some ways, but it's hard as, it has to be in recognition of the role of the union on campus. And I think when the chapter can support the union, it should. I think, I've seen places where there's good dialogue between the chapter and the union, and oftentimes, the chapter is helping support issues that are going to come up at the bargaining table, or if there's something that the chapter thinks is really important, the union's pushing it too. It's really figuring out how to get to the point where you can have that relationship.
Also, the capacity of an advocate, a person, who's acting in that role, it's a very different role than someone who's bargaining for a contract. So the advocate does something else. So I think that's also, a little bit problematic in some people's minds, because, and that's why we have this rhetoric about people stepping on toes.
Yeah.
Because essentially the advocate is there in separate capacity, am I right? In a way of, the issues that come up, in supplementing, in many ways, what the collective bargaining unit is doing on campus. I just failed to see that attack mode in place. I just didn't see that, especially when this is operating on the level, it's a national institution about higher education. So it's I don't know. Could you describe maybe what advocacy is, perhaps?
Well, what advocacy is, it's really faculty coming together collectively to work on issues of shared concern on the campus, right? There is the time, There's a tie into the national organization. We tend to push certain programs. We're also there to provide support for the chapter. I mean, mainly what we do is provide support. You guys tell us what the issues are, and we provide you with support for working on it on your campus. But really, you know, oftentimes what you see with advocacy chapters is they will circulate petitions. They'll encourage faculty to show up at events, you know, speak out on an issue. They'll work through the shared governance body. You know, they advocate at that level. I do think, you know, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not a collective bargaining relationship. The chapter is not the exclusive bargaining agent, and, you know, people need to be clear about that. You know, I'm always one to think that, you know, one needs to be careful that the administration is clear about that, because I think if an administration senses that they can divide and conquer, they will, right? So, I mean, to me, it's fine figuring out how to work around that is the important thing. You know, the problem isn't the union or the AAUP chapter. The question is probably making sure that the administration recognizes the appropriate role for each organization on campus. And, you know, really part of what an advocacy chapter can do is to help ensure the administration recognizes that role.
Can you give an example of an institution where there were labor issues where the AAUP had one function and the bargaining union had another? How they work together?
Yeah. A good example of that is the University of Southern Maine. They're an NEA bargaining campus. They're represented by the Maine Education Association. They have an AAUP advocacy chapter on campus. They are one of the places, when I talk about this nationwide trend of sort of pseudo-exigency, they had this thing come up last year, and it's made a reappearance again this year, where their administration is saying, there's this financial crisis, and what it means is we have to completely reorganize the institution, and we're going to they're shutting down pre-med and I think a couple of languages. And, you know, we're doing this and we're doing that, and we're getting rid of tenure lines. None of it's going through the processes laid out in the Senate bylaws for exigency, right? It's clearly an administration that wants to reimagine what higher education is, restructure higher education. Under their collective bargaining agreement, the union obviously plays a pretty important role in that. What they have found is that they have requested the help of the chapter in addressing that issue. So the chapter has done a financial analysis of the institution. They've been able to get access to documents that for whatever reason the union couldn't. They're supporting the union. You know, the union's dealing with grievances around people being laid off and, you know, basically fired. And they're supporting the union with that. But then they're also working on the chapter is working on the shared governance angle, which is you can't just decide to get rid of programs and departments because you have this other vision for higher education. You know, you have to work with us on that. Us, the faculty. So that's a place for the union and the faculty are working together on a pretty major crisis. And I think the feeling is by the members there that both organizations are pretty essential for what they're trying to accomplish. And they have a hard time doing it just one or the other.
Yeah, I just wanted to address this issue. I know there was a lot of confusion on campus when we started the AAUP chapter, because I think, understandably so, a lot of folks think AAUP is the collective bargaining organization on campuses, and it is in some of our neighboring campuses. But we tried to be as clear as we could with our communications that we're not doing collective bargaining. We are ably represented on this campus with the AFA and the NCCFT, but we are working in support of shared governance, working in support of the unions. And the way that we're doing this is through AAUP policies and procedures. For example, We had put out we wrote a letter to the board, actually 2 letters to the board over the last month, supporting the Senate and quoting AAUP principles regarding faculty control of curriculum. So I think from my previous work as Senate Chair, I think that the most important part of organizations to be successful on this campus is for everyone to know their role and to work complementary to one another. And that is our intent. So we're very much committed to that piece of it. And then I think the other piece of it is that whole national dialogue. I mean, I've been a member of AAUP for a number of years. I love the organization. And we relied heavily on AAUP principles when we were dealing with Dr. the A. Saunders administration. So, and they were helpful. But now that we have a chapter, we can rely more heavily on AAUP to assist us. But I don't know if I answered your questions, but I think that citing quickly, I mean, we've been responding quickly, and we're citing AAUP principles when the administration or the board is overstepping their role in shared governance. So far, no union, no collective bargaining issues have come up, but if there's a collective bargaining issue that comes up that AAUP has a position on, then we will support whatever our unions are saying. So, any questions on any further questions on that? Yeah.
I don't think I need a microphone. Some of you remember both the AAUP and the union things. I wanted to tell this little apocryphal story, and I think since we have a minute or two, about how the AAUP first came to Nassau. Back in 1963, new faculty were in line to sign up for contracts as they were being hired. And Doris Schaefer, who was my predecessor and one of the founders of the NCCFT here at the college, was in line with someone named Jack Berlin from the business department. They didn't know each other. And also in line was Gene Glickman, so he's my witness. He verifies the story that happened. And they're proceeding through the line, and they had to sign various papers, one of which was Nuala Drescher. Some of you know her as former president of the UUP, SUNY's union. The 4 of them were in line. They didn't know each other, and they were asked to sign a loyalty oath. It was the height of the Cold War, a year after the Cuban Missile Test, fall of '63. And one by one, they said, no, and they started to talk to each other about this, although I don't know if they got Gene in on that conversation. And they got away with it. One thing or another. Guider, I think, was there. Bob Guider. Some of you remember Bob Guider. He said, all right. But Doris Schaefer and Nuala Drescher, at that moment, decided to form the first community college AAUP chapter in the United States. And I think you can verify that if you need to, but that's what they always told me. And when the first union contract was made, and I know Gene was there and part of that process, the foundation they used for our faculty governance, which is still in the contract, Phyllis is smiling because she knows this is true too, that the AAUP handbook on academic freedom and due process and faculty governance was codified in contract language in that first bargaining agreement.
Which is a really big deal to have the force of contract for that.
Yes, it is. And the academic senate that we have is actually given authority over curriculum and educational decisions, unless otherwise specifically excluded from it. So this is a very strong and very outstanding tradition of AAUP participation at this institution, and I hope it continues with everyone.
I hate to admit this in front of Phil, but I signed the oath. I was in that line too. Nassau Community College is a big school, and we have quite a proud tradition of leadership and academic freedom. Not only was the first AAUP chapter formed here, And if you're wondering what happened to it, everyone who was the leadership of the AAUP chapter became the NCCFT. The Nassau Community College also has an adjunct union, the AFA, which happens to be the first adjunct union formed in the United States, which formed, I believe, about 1972? About 1972. So that's another tradition we're very, very proud of. Being a large school, we have a lot of people and a lot of diversity and a lot of opinions that need to be expressed. My opinion as to why we need an advocacy group, I could never say that right. It's actually because I'm from Jersey. Maybe that's why I had to sign the is because this organization truly represents a single group, a single interest, the professoriate at Nassau Community College. The other groups have wider approaches and opinions as to what's happening at the school. We have a faculty senate, but the faculty senate has a contingency of administrators that vote on decisions and curriculum that come before it. Students vote on it as well. We have an NCCFT, which is a union, but much of what they're representing is pragmatic. They have to make concessions, they have to make deals, they have to work things out to come out with a contract. As a member of a separate group, I believe that I will have voice to talk about ideals that may not ever be realized, but I can voice them because I think they're important and I want them to be heard. They don't have to be negotiated and controlled, they're just spoken, and maybe they'll become part of our culture. The NCCFT, as well as the AFA, our union, have backed certain politicians in electoral races for county government and state government. Most of us will have other opinions politically. That doesn't come into an advocacy chapter. Those things are separate. We're going to talk about ideals as to where we want to go and what we want to achieve as teachers, as educators, and not be constrained by any type of need to stay within the bounds of the contract. We don't police a contract, we don't negotiate a contract, we talk for what we hope will one day be in a contract. Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming, and I just wanted to, before you leave, I just wanted to give Dr. Schmid a certificate expressing our deepest gratitude for her attendance.